Chapter 315, Flu Powder Anti-Gravity. Friday, August 9, 1996, University of Oxford, Great Britain's Taylor looked at the report in surprise. The physicist's investigation of the magical world was making discoveries every day, and the scientific study of magic was becoming a fast-growing field. Most of the new advances so far had been in biology, and from what he'd been told, the people who had discovered the Q and Z genes had been nominated for the Nobel Prize in medicine. Taylor didn't need to shell out the £79 and 95 pence to be tested for wizarding genes, as it was fairly obvious he had the Q complex. Every single person who had been able to handle wands without being harmed had proven to have the Q, including dear old King William V. Supposedly, there was a big debate going on as to whether Hogwarts would start accepting Q-only candidates as students. The bookies, at last check, had it at 2-1 against. It appeared that he was only person in the physics department to have the Q. This soon made him the butt of Star Trek jokes, and people were soon flashing lights, on and off, whenever he walked into the room. He'd already picked up at least one nickname, Moan Capitaine, and if he heard it any more, he'd probably flip out. Most of the grad students had tested themselves once he told them what he'd found. This, of course, had had another unexpected side effect. One girl in the chemistry department had the Z, and people promptly started trying to set the two of them up to see if they could produce Muggle-born children. Taylor found this amusing, yet rather disturbing. The girl was ugly as hell, and from what he knew, she was married. The fact that he could manipulate wands had suddenly made the professors take a hell of a lot more interest in him, and he had already received 5 offers from labs focusing on magical discoveries. He was flattered, of course, and had to explain that he couldn't work for them until his thesis was finished, at which point he would be able to sign on as a postdoc or perhaps as a permanent researcher. He laughed when he thought of the fact that he'd virtually secured himself a job. In an economy like this, leverage like that could come in handy. He forced the future out of his mind as he put the report on the table and picked up the telephone. If these people from the University of Arizona had discovered what he thought they had, he'd probably be able to co-author a paper with them. Hoping that the people in Arizona would be up at this early hour, he dialed the number. 3 rings later, a man answered. "This is Dr. Morton. Who's calling?" Taylor hoped he wouldn't mess this up. "Dr. Morton, my name is Innes Taylor from the University of Oxford. The Brit who can hold wands and get away with it." Taylor grinned, perhaps another prospective employer. "Yes, Dr. Morton. However, my ability to hold wands isn't what I'm calling about. I just read your article about flu powder. I enjoyed it, and it was well written, and I may be able to answer some of your questions." Morton whistled. "Really? You've done some work with flu powder?" "No, doctor. However, I have done some work with wands, and believe I know what may be the driving force behind wand magic. If my hunch is right, flu powder is going to be driven by the same thing." There was a stunned pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Morton said, "That would be an amazing discovery if that's the case. What is it? All we could tell is that it goes beyond physics as we know it." Taylor chuckled. "Oh, you got that right. You see, the wands are powered by what appears to be anti-gravity." There was another pause, after which Morton sounded uneasy. "Anti-gravity. There's no such thing as repulsive gravity." "Not anymore, Doctor. Do you by any chance have a gravimeter in the building with microgal precision? I want you to do an experiment for me." Morton thought for a moment. Well, we don't have one, but the physics lab on the 3rd floor has one. Give me an hour to set it up and I'll get back to you. What do you want us to do?" "Bring the powder to whatever device you use to facilitate travel if you have one. Measure the gravitational constant, and then measure it again with the flu powder near the machine. Then have someone travel using it while someone else is watching the gravimeter." Taylor could hear Morton scribbling on a piece of paper. "Sounds simple enough. I'll get back to you in an hour." 1 hour later, Morton called back. All right, we've got 9.80662 in the room right now. We're bringing the flu powder over now. That can't be right. Taylor punched his fist in the air. Hello, Nobel Prize. Careful not to reveal any emotions, he asked for clarification. Well, it went up to 9.80665 when the grad student dropped off the packet. We first thought that it was the mass of the student, but the readout didn't budge after she left. Taylor nodded. That's just what I saw with the wand, Doctor. Now try replacing the packet with something with the same apparent mass. There was a pause, followed by an odd 9.80662. Are you telling me that this stuff increases the gravitational constant more than its mass would predict? That's exactly what I'm saying, Doctor. Let's exchange email addresses. We have a lot to discuss. Enfield. Radnor's dizzy spells were becoming more and more frequent. He couldn't keep up this workload, he thought. He made a mental note to start delegating more stuff off to Ariadne over the next week or so. He did what he could to stay focused on the announcement. Yes, people. It is possible for Muggles to fly brooms and flying carpets provided, A, that they have training, which is what the MIT students did not have when they experimented with the brooms, and B, they have a wizard to make the object fly. The levitation charm is safe and effective, having been perfected many centuries ago. It provides easy travel, with a maximum of about 100 mph in not 2 but 3 dimensions. Radnor paused for effect. Yes, exactly 3 dimensions. If people try to use it to travel in more than 3 dimensions, the American Department of Magic will be most unhappy, especially Shauna Santana of the Big Thicket National Preserve facility in Texas. DeLorean Motor Corporation. Biff looked up from his desk and waved as Oscar walked in. Hi, Biff. I was wondering whether you can help me with something. I need to take the time turner out of the DeLorean. I think I know enough about it to at least be able to take it apart and put it back together without breaking it. Whether I'll be able to reverse engineer it before the feds get their greedy hands on it is another question. However, I'll do my best. Biff nodded, though alarm bells rang in his head. Sure, I'll go and take it out. Wait here. He started heading towards the car and frowned when Oscar tagged behind him. I'll have to come with you, Biff. It's going to be hard to take that thing out without activating it. You're going to need my help. Hoping that the wizard would help more than harm him, Biff led Oscar over to the car and pointed at the hood. Let me get my equipment so I can open the hood. Don't touch anything until I tell you, all right. Oscar nodded and sat in the driver's seat. Fine with me. In the meantime, I'll just make sure the time circuits are off. Where's that damn panel again? Biff gritted his teeth as he reached for his toolbox. When he returned, he saw that Oscar had an odd look on his face. The wizard was looking at him strangely. Was there a malfunction, Biff? I don't know why it's reading this, but it claims the most recent destination time was Tuesday morning, 3:30 Zulu. That's 10:30 Monday night. You were here then, weren't you? Did anything strange happen then? Someone hit the door or something like that? Biff shrugged. I was in the lab at 10:30, but the DeLorean was out at the time. Maybe someone else was working on it. I don't remember, to be honest. Oscar grunted. Fortunately, we'll be able to figure it out. There's a secret spell I found which will allow the time turner to issue a report on its last few uses. If it disappeared when we weren't looking, we'll know why. Biff's face whitened, but thankfully Oscar didn't see him as the wizard bent down over the panel. This was not good. Chapter 316. Farewell, Chrononaut. Saturday, August 10, 1996, Department of Magic Headquarters, Enfield, United States of America. The aide barged into Radnor's office. Sir, we've got a problem. Radnor groaned. Now what? I'm a bit busy here, and I haven't slept for. We've just received word that someone at DeLorean Motor Corporation just used the Chrononaut to bring information from the future to the present. That's way too dangerous. Radner's vision blurred momentarily as his jaw dropped. When was this? How do you know this? An auto mechanic decided to use the car to take a joyride into the future. The time turner recorded the information on the transit, and that information was apparently retrieved by someone who was trying to work with the time turner. Radner's face turned beet red. I told Shauna to get that damn time turner. What the hell is it still doing out there? It's not going to be out there for long, sir. Once the wizard working with the device realized what had happened, he immediately questioned the mechanic. From what I've been told, the mechanic traveled into the future to steal the winning numbers from today's Lotto Texas drawing, with an estimated jackpot of $12 million. Radner fumed. Someone's been watching Back to the Future, I see. Sounds like it, sir. When confronted by the wizard, the mechanic tried to bribe him by offering him a share of the pot. The wizard, afraid of being caught up in the damn dragnet, appears to have spoken to his manager. Our time traveler was promptly fired, and Chairwoman Santana is coming in as we speak to take custody of the time turner. They're going absolutely nuts down there, sir. No fewer than 3 big thicket committees are demanding an explanation. Radner steadied himself as another dizziness spell struck him. He'd take a long nap once this was resolved. Trying to not let it show, he turned back to the aide. I want to know as soon as the time turner is in our possession. DeLorean can make cars fly as much as they want. However, if they do anything involving time travel, I want them out of business. Obliviate all their employees if necessary. I want this thing sealed up tight. Radner shook his head in disbelief as another man rushed by him with a photograph and a document in his hand. Sir, I apologize for the interruption, but we've got some interesting evidence here against Mr. Lannon, the fellow accused of using the time turner. The new advisor showed the objects to Radner. The picture showed a 30-something man, presumably Radner, working at a desk in the lab with the car. The clock behind the desk read 11:31, August 6th. The other document appeared to be a police report about a speeding ticket. The secretary's eyes widened when he noticed the date stamp, 23:31 Central on 8/6/96. They widened even further when he noticed the suspect, Brian Tannen, in a 1982 DeLorean, a good 50 miles outside Humble. The newcomer took the words right out of Radner's mouth. Look, sir, the suspect is in 2 places at the same time, along with the car. Radner was furious. He immediately contacted Chairwoman Santana, who reported that the Department of Magic agents were running all over the DeLorean headquarters, trying to convince everyone that the chrononaut was actually a flying car called the Aviator, which did not have the ability to travel through time. The tough part was trying to explain why the car had disappeared for 9 seconds during the demo. Radner thanked Santana profusely. Another crisis had been resolved. As the adrenaline slowly left his system, he suddenly found himself profoundly fatigued. The next thing he knew, the 2 agents were at his side looking at him with concern. Are you okay there? You seem to have spaced out for a second. Radner nodded. I'll be fine now that this time turner's been taken care of. I'll go home and rest. Tell Ariadne to take the point while I'm. A third person barged in before he could finish his sentence. Sir, we've got an unauthorized Geminio spell in Macon, Georgia. That's right in the center of the area where duplicated dollar bills have been found. We've sent, sir. Are you okay? Radner's vision swam for a second. He was about to dismiss the man when he felt a pain in his chest. He fell to the ground as everything went black. Presidential Palaceland of the Howiehandams. Nihim didn't like what he was seeing. Although the mansion's security guards were putting up a valiant fight, there were simply too many of them. The fact that half of them were firing what appeared to be Muggle explosive devices from the air didn't help. He had to admit that he was intrigued by the Muggle flying devices. Most of them were odd, bulbous-looking things with a rotating set of blades on their heads and explosive devices inside them. He winced as another of them sped towards the compound, detonated in a ball of fire, and knocked down part of a tower. His advisor tugged at his shoulder. "Mr. President, we've got to get you out of here. We can't defend against." The window suddenly exploded, spraying glass all over the room. The advisor suddenly collapsed as a shard hit him in one of his rear legs, cutting it off. Nihim, who had been standing a few feet further away, barely had time to duck before the deadly fragments flew over his head. He stared at his injured advisor. "Son, let me help you, I think." The guard could barely speak through his pain. "No, get out. Let me go. It's the only chance you have." Another explosion rocked the room, knocking the chandelier from the ceiling and setting the rug on fire. It slowly dawned on Nihim that the man was right. It was over, and he had to get out quickly. However, he wasn't going to leave the guard. He was the president of the Centaur Republic. It was his duty to protect his citizens. He spent a precious 20 seconds lifting the injured man onto his back and headed out into the corridor, looking for a wizard or an emergency escape portkey. He couldn't see much, though, as the corridor was filled with smoke and rubble. He had gotten maybe 30 feet when he heard footsteps, human ones, coming down the corridor. Someone pointed an odd-looking device at him, gaped as he recognized him, and shouted, "Arrête, Monsieur President." Nihim didn't know what the man was saying. However, that odd-looking device didn't look friendly. The injured man on his back reached for his bow, but was felled by the human's device before he could fire it. Groaning painfully, the centaur fell off Nihim's back. The human, with an odd red, white, and blue logo on his uniform, pointed his weapon at Nihim. Having seen what the weapon could do, Nihim hoped for the best. He raised his hands in the air and opened them. Hoping they understood Gulliver, he spoke precisely and clearly. "I surrender." Amazingly, they understood his language. Still pointing their weapon at him, they tied his hands with a heavy cord. Then they stared at him hard, pointed at his feet, and barked something at him in garbled Gulliver. "You hit us with feet, you die. You no fight, you be placed in secure location, house arrest. You agree?" Nihim nodded. "I agree, human. Rest assured, however, that this will just get you into trouble. My people will not surrender this easily. What I do for the sake of my people." The human prodded him with the weapon. "We see, Monsieur President, we see." And with that, Nihim was marched out of the building to the cheers of the human attackers. Chapter 317. The King's Double Curriculum. Sunday, August 11, 1996, Windsor Castle, England. King William looked up as Headmaster Snape walked in with a girl in her mid-20s. "Your Majesty, it's my pleasure to inform you that we have found someone who will help you with your studies. You will be able to attend Hogwarts after all if you so desire. If you do so, keep in mind that you will be doing a double curriculum, your current school's classes as well as the magical ones. You will be exempted from Muggle studies because of your background, which should free up some time." The king smiled. "I'll give it a try. I'm very curious as to what I can do." "As are many people, Your Majesty. We are working on a combined Hogwarts traditional school schedule, and you will be traveling to and from the two schools several times per day via Portkey. The schedule will be grueling, Your Majesty. First class will be at 8 a.m., and last class will end at 6 p.m. What's more, both schools will be giving homework." William grinned. "Maybe I can do what Hermione did and use a time turner too." Snape's face soured, and the headmaster cut him off. "No, absolutely not. Giving Miss Granger that device was a mistake, and my predecessor lost his position over it." William's mouth clamped shut as the headmaster turned to the woman next to him. "Your Majesty, you will have two new tutors. One of them is a Korean man who also a Qonli wizard. We're working on getting a translator for him right now. This woman here is Lady Laura Spencer, Wizarding Queen of England, Hogwarts class of '89. William's jaw dropped. "Wizarding what? How?" Snape talked over him. "You may have heard in the news that several of the world's royal families started out as wizarding lines. Now that the statute of secrecy has fallen, the royals with both Q and Z are starting to come out." The Romanovs and Habsburgs have already introduced themselves to the world, and the wizarding kings and queens from those lines have taken a ceremonial role as the immediate supervisors of the ministers of magic. The fact that you have the Q in your genome is due to your relationship with the royal family. William stared at Laura. This girl here is my wizarding counterpart. She rules wizarding Britain much as I rule Muggle Britain. The woman nodded. In theory, yes. There have been times when the British Ministry of Magic has answered to the wizarding king or queen and not the Muggle one. However, my father and I have both been rather introverted and are more than happy to stay out of the way. That's why the Ministry of Magic did a lot of work with the Prime Minister and your grandmother, and even some of the wizards don't know about us. Snape took over from there. Lady Laura is an accomplished witch, specializing in transfiguration and potions. She actually managed to get an E in my course without even being a member of Slytherin. That is not very easy. Be advised that her royal status did not grant her any unusual privileges. The entire staff treated her just the same as any other student. Laura nodded abruptly at that. That he did, William. That he did. I suppose I should call you Your Majesty, but since I also go by Her Majesty from time to time, that title tends to be a bit ambiguous in these circumstances. William turned to Laura. Did you do a double curriculum as well? Yes, I did, William. Normally, wizards don't do a double curriculum. However, long-standing tradition dictates that members of the royal family do a double curriculum in case the statute of secrecy falls during that person's lifetime. Headmaster Snape was my potions teacher at the time, and I can tell you that the 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. class schedule is very close to what I had to deal with as a student. You'll be doing homework to 10 or 11 each night. It's going to be very tough. However, if you make it through, you'll be the first acting wizard king the Muggles have seen in over 600 years. Enfield, Ma, the aide turned to Persephone Ariadne. We have good news. The wizards took over as soon as he fell down and did what they could do reduce the damage. He's going to make a full recovery. However, he agreed to step down and retire for health reasons. Next time, he might not be as lucky, particularly if he's out among the Muggles when it happens. Ariadne frowned. It's good to hear that Radner survived. That makes me Secretary of Magic, right? It does. Congratulations, Madame Secretary. We've already organized a meeting so that Radner's advisors can get you up to speed. Supposedly, they've already dealt with that renegade time-turner in the DeLorean and just arrested someone for Geminioing dollar bills. There's absolute chaos in Howienham territory as the Yahoos just overthrow the government with a good infusion of Muggle weapons. Things are really ugly down there. The Yahoos are trying to consolidate power. The upper-class centaurs are fighting back. The lower-class centaurs are trying to take advantage of the situation and improve their lot, and so forth. To make matters worse, Nihim was placed under house arrest by the revolutionaries shortly after he appealed to Spew and Atlantis. Finally, a few French officers stationed in the Marquesas got involved with choppers, and so forth. Ariadne hissed, just what we need the French getting involved. Amen to that. However, those appear to have been the exception rather than the rule, as they had already been in the area at the time. The French and the Gullivers have agreed to stay out of this. They don't want it to escalate into another war so soon after Judgment Day. Ariadne frowned. The Gulliver Consortium came out. When did this happen? It didn't, Madame Secretary. They used someone from Atlantis as an intermediary when they spoke to the French. France still doesn't know of any hidden nations other than Roctorattle, Atalis, Howienhamland, and Zelenda. Ariadne shuddered for a moment, then chuckled bitterly. I can see why Radner collapsed. Combining Muggle relations with the Secretary of Magic's traditional work can be enough to work anyone to death, let alone someone who is 78. I think it's about time to rectify that. The aide blinked. Ma'am. Ariadne looked out the window. Would you agree that things would be best if the Secretary of Magic only dealt with internal affairs and didn't interact with the Muggles much? The aide thought for a moment. It would probably help. However, someone's going to have to deal with the Muggles now that the statute of secrecy is down. Indeed, that's why we're going to do what Atlantis did. You know how they've got Dialynis in the and Dagher running Atlantis? I'm thinking of doing the same thing. We elect wizarding representatives to the House and Senate to deal with Muggle affairs. If the Constitution won't let us do that, I'll recommend that I delegate magical internal affairs, that is, those which don't involve Muggles, to the next Deputy Secretary of Magic. I expect that will spread the work around enough to prevent public servants from having heart attacks. The Secretary of Magic takes Dialynis's role, and the Deputy Secretary takes Dagger's. The aide whistled. You know, that might just work, that might just work. Ariadne continued. Which reminds me, I'm going to need to find a new headmaster for the school here. There's going to have to be a major shake-up. School may be delayed for a few weeks while we sort this out. We're going to have to turn the school co-ed. Most of the men's school was wiped out when America for Humans destroyed Dana and Greenwich. We don't have enough teachers to go around anymore, particularly since many of both the women's and men's teachers lived in those two towns. I suspect that the Salem Witches Institute will be discontinued and incorporated into an Enfield-based Quabbin Academy of Sorcery for both boys and girls. The aide shook his head. I doubt you'll be able to change the school charter on short notice like that. At the very least, you'll have to talk to the headmaster and the Secretary of Magic. Oh. Ariadne chuckled as the aide stared at her in realization. Don't worry, sir. I highly doubt that's going to be a problem. In fact, I know exactly what the Secretary of Magic and the headmaster are going to say. What's more, I can't imagine them disagreeing with me. The aide laughed at that as well. Indeed, Madame Secretary, I can't imagine how they could possibly disagree with you. Roanoke, TX. The excited lottery winner jumped even higher when the lottery official told him the news. I don't need to split the pot after all. I get all $12 million. That's right, sir. You get all of it. It's going to be maybe $8 million after taxes, but it's still double what you would have gotten earlier. But what happened to the winner from Humble? He cheated, sir, and is currently spending time preparing for his trial. Zuckwood's Manoroctorattle. The centaur looked doubtingly at the merman Gir Zuckwood's and the human Thune Lentes, a Spedanian wizard who created the enchantments for the spider walkers, as he was told. After the events of the last few days, he found it hard to trust a human, wizard or not. Still, the magical machines of Roctorattle looked promising, and his kind desperately needed any advantage against the Muggle weapons of the Yahoo Rebellion. Ambassador Arihim was new to his post, replacing his predecessor, who suddenly asked to be recommissioned elsewhere just last week. Officially, no reason was given. Personally, he thought the man came to hate the unholy screeching of merpeople out of water so much, he left. While he agreed that the underwater city wasn't suitable for centaurs, he couldn't hold the screeches against the merpeople. It's not like they had much choice in that matter. It was surface mermish, or writing on a slate, and as he understood the language, it was polite to let the merpeople choose the more convenient form of communication, especially when one was asking them a favor. I'm terribly sorry to hear about the civil war on your homeland, Ambassador, said the siren inventor. I wish I had a working prototype of powered armor specifically tailored to your kind's needs, but alas, I couldn't get all parts right. You see, the upper body and the horse torso is easily covered to the likeness of your people's traditional heavy armors, but we could yet figure out what to do with the legs. While we could theoretically use the same solution as in our merpeople and prototype human models, hiding an entire centaur lower body, legs and all, in a thorax-like container, and adding spider feet, would lead to a result that's both too big and too heavy to be any good in a rainforest. This was bad. What do you mean, you have a human prototype? The wizard answered. It's not what you think. Our first prototypes were bipedal. Big, clumsy things, with the pilot in a sealed compartment and his movements copied and amplified by an enlarged humanoid metal body around him. Tests failed when it was proven to be heavier than a giant, and its legs very clumsy with merpeople pilots. However, after establishing trade and diplomatic relations with Muggle nations, we concluded that, with minor modifications, the design could be better than what machines the Muggles now use for heavy lifting. And for war, grunted the centaur. The wizard no doubt thought about that. Excuse me, we didn't incorporate any weapons in the walkers. Some tools and the amplified power itself, combined with the hard metal exoskeleton, can be used offensively, but it's no more a weapon than your hooves or a giant's strength or a simple human's fist. Jir interrupted. But those walkers can carry heavy weapons and handle great recoil. And while its offensive capacities aren't greater than a pissed-off giant's, there is the matter of the defensive. Its armor is enough to shrug off most handheld Muggle weapons or centaur arrows. And that's exactly why we didn't yet begin to produce them. We don't trust humans with such power, not when it's so easy to use it to wage war. The centaur remarked bitterly. So, you can't help us, but at least you won't help our enemies either. Good to know. You know, I expected the fabled friendship of our two species to get more tangible results. Later. After a bad day full of pleading for assistance and receiving only empty promises, or not even those, the centaur ambassador returned to his quarters, exhausted and angry. He closed the door behind himself, trotted to the bed, and without even bothering to undress, fell on it. A soft crunching sound from under his pillows made him bolt up in surprise. It was an envelope, sealed with an elaborate symbol. He recognized the style as ancient Mermish picture writing usually seen in the Portkey room to mark destinations, but he definitely hasn't seen this particular symbol before. He opened it, and a short note unfolded, reading, "We know your homeland is under attack, and we know you don't get enough assistance. We can help. Come to the gnawing Grindelow Tavern tonight, alone. Make sure you aren't followed. Your friends. P.S. This note will set itself on fire now." True to the mysterious writer's word, as soon as he finished reading, the letter and the envelope burst into flames. After a moment's fright, he was relieved to discover the flames didn't burn him. It was a standard self-destruct spell, focusing its damage on the target object only. All of this sounded very unofficial. Then again, official channels seemed to get him no help, so it was time to look elsewhere. Tonight might end up being a good night. Unknown location Nevada, John T. Lance couldn't wait to see his latest catch. An aura in the service of the American Ministry of Magic, the henchmen holding him down, keeping their eyes closely focused on him. They couldn't allow themselves to forget. John T. Lance considered himself a clever man. He was a skilled wizard, had even made some new spells. He was also, above all, pragmatic. Why use an unforgivable curse when one could simply use a stunning spell on the heart or set the enemy on fire? At least it didn't mean lifetime with the dementors around. And now he was going to take himself up from petty organized crime to bigger things. He didn't exactly want to rule the world, but it had proven to be a mess he intended to fix. There were several things about John T. Lance that were also important, such as the curious fact that nobody remembered him if they put their eyes off him. He was thus almost untouchable by the auras. Horcruxes are pathetic, he thought idly. He had never been particularly scared of death, and wanting to hold on to one's old life was cowardly somehow. Come the fire or the darkness, he wasn't gonna flinch. He looked at the book, the old, leather-bound, parchment-made notebook in his hand. It had a picture in it, an old Roman lance made out of gold, above it the words Lancia Fortuna. Spear of fortune, of fate, of destiny. He idly scratched his head, the blonde hair giving way to his fingers. They said the spear of destiny could make one man the equal of an army, and an army invincible. If that was even barely true, the major obstacle in his way, Atlantis, might as well disband itself. He went up to the prisoner. "We're letting you go," he said, a touch of legilimency making the voice impossible to resist. Implanting suggestions into somebody as he spoke was easier, at least for him, than imperious, and more importantly, wasn't covered by the law. "Because we need you to help us find something very, very important, and then bring it to us. Go along with us." He showed him the picture of the spear. The Auror nodded. The henchman released him. The Auror turned his back. John Lance pointed his wand at the Auror. The Auror needed to forget the henchman as well. Obliviate. He was careful not to touch the suggestion he had so delicately implanted. The Auror apparated away, oblivious that any time had passed gnawing Grindelow tavern rock to rattle. Rather than paying for intracity Portkey or apparition, Arihim ended up hiring a wizard to cast a bubblehead charm on him for 10 hours, paying a fee of 1 sickle per hour, and walked. Unlike his predecessor, he was no wizard, so it was either that or gillyweed, and while the plant was freely supplied to foreign diplomats, its fixed durations and water-breathing-only effect made it unpopular. The charm, on the other hand, will provide him breathable air for the next 10 hours and will allow solid objects, such as food or a straw for drinks, to pass its barrier unhindered. An ideal spell for a dinner and some shady business afterwards. Entering the tavern, he saw the place's typical mixed clientele, merpeople of all shape and color on the flooded ground floor, and human wizards, goblins, fairies, and vila on the air-filled first floor. He saw an unusually large number of centaurs, leaning together in groups of a few, speaking with soft tones and worried faces refugees, no doubt. He frowned upon seeing a pair of humans wearing obviously Muggle clothing in a corner, loudly conversing in terribly accented Gulliver. He almost jumped when he felt a hand clamping on his arm. Looking down, he saw a human wearing strange wizard robes, his skin tone and facial features marking him as a mix of many different bloodlines. The wizard spoke in Gulliver, his accent Hispanic. "It's curious how bold the city's government got, letting Muggles walk among us, don't you agree, Ambassador?" His initial fears confirmed, Arihim stammered. "Muggles? How can they be here?" The wizard sneered. "Oh, supposedly they are only allowed in limited number, and with serious background checks. Only a handful of anthropologists and some scientists. The slant-eyed one over there, getting wasted on goblin moonshine, is allegedly a respectable expert of air filtration systems from Japan, no doubt brought here to work on the government's Walker program. The pink-skinned one is said to come from the USA and studies dolphin behavior. Let me not tell you my honest opinion about researchers who don't notice their subject is sentient even after centuries. The ladies here," he nodded towards a pair of vila, "should not hear such harsh language." Looking back at the centaur, he added, "Oh, but I forgot my manners. My name is Thiago Abita from Chile, and I'm glad you're here tonight. We have much to discuss, but first let's have dinner." Later. Finishing the last of his oat salad, Arihim leaned back into the chair exclusively for centaurs with a content sigh. Of course, eating was the least of what he'd done. As a diplomat, he got quite an experience observing everything his clients did and analyzing them. This fellow was a mystery. For being Chilean, his Gulliver was surprisingly good, almost as if the accent was just for show. His table manners were refined, and he took great joy tasting his food, but despite consuming an ordinary human serving, his body language somehow faintly suggested he is used to eating much more. And the way he drank appeared to be very measured, as if he had to pay attention to swallowing, a perfectly normal bodily function that he did every day in his whole life. The signs were minuscule, but they added up. This man was not what he appeared to be. The wizard spoke. "So, care to go somewhere more private for our little chat?" The ambassador wasn't so hasty. "Mister, what was it, a bitter? I'm a diplomat of a government that's fighting a civil war and losing to your kind. Forgive me for being mistrustful, but I have to ask you who you really are." Thiago laughed cheerfully. "A sharp one you are, my friend. My true answer is only for you to hear, but here is a riddle for now. Standing in the shadows, vigilant, from a city of gems untouched by sunlight, we watch the world. Does it ring a bell? Thinking for some minutes, the answer came to Arihim, and he snorted. You've got to be kidding me. The Wandering City is a child's tale, and everyone knows there are no wizards hidden from Atlantis. And the tale says gold, silver, and diamonds, not gems. The wizard's face was entirely serious. In a low voice, he only said, crystals, actually. The centaur's eyes widened. So the story is actually true. F asterisk asterisk K me sideways. There is no way I believe it, the alleged human chuckled. I sincerely hope you spoke figuratively. While I do like centaurs, this affection is purely platonic, and I intend to keep it that way. Now shall we leave? Nodding, the centaur stood up and followed him to the nearest designated apparition point asterisk in one of the side rooms. From here, they apparated to another room in an unknown building. We're safe here from unwanted ears and eyes, Mr. Arihim. This room is fidelious to me and my associates. What's said here stays here. Any questions? Many, admitted the centaur. But first things first, am I right to assume you aren't human? The tales were somewhat hazy in that regard, but I've watched you, and I found your behavior strange. The wizard smiled. You got that right. I can't show my true form now, but I'm no more human than you. Is that a problem? Hell no, said the ambassador. I find it hard to trust a human nowadays, but please tell me, what are you then? A vampire? Don't be ridiculous, that's a completely different hidden place. No, I'm a merwizard, a merman with all the skills of a human wizard, and more. Now, let's speak about you. I hear your president was taken prisoner yesterday by rebel yahoos, led by an outsider muggle. Is that true? The centaur sighed. While it's true, the whole truth is more complicated than that. I assume your people can't take our form, so your knowledge of Howienhamlin's day-to-day politics is fairly limited. So, allow me to fill in the gaps. Out of 560,000 centaur citizens, only about 30% owns any yahoos. Out of these, the overwhelming majority has just one or two yahoos, usually as household tools and such. There are less than 1,000 plantation owners who have dozens or even hundreds of yahoos. The merwizard sarcastically interrupted. Let me guess, those plantation owners run the country. Not exactly. The land of the Howienhams is a real democracy, at least for citizens, and all centaurs are citizens. However, it's true in a way. There are several parties, usually identifying with various layers of society, and currently the Conservative Party is the leading faction of the parliament with 40% at the last election, and most plantation owners support that one. But aside of independent delegates and minor power groups, there are two other major players worth mentioning, the isolationists and the egalitarians. Now, as their name suggests, the isolationists think we should live separately from the humans. Their party has much support, but since they can't come up with working solutions, their popularity waxes and wanes, and they are more often divided than not. At the last election, they were about to achieve about 30%, but their party was thorn in two mid-campaign when their leader died of old age and her successors became divided over whether to exile the yahoos or give them part of the continent. The latter are the separationists, taking 10% from that 30. Then there are the egalitarians, who say all yahoos should be freed and given full citizenship. Those nutjobs managed 20% at the last election, but claimed the election was rigged, and they actually have more. The wizard whistled. Ah, the thrills of domestic politics. Looks like we're not so different after all. So tell me, which faction sided with the rebel yahoos? The centaur looked grim. There were Yahoo terrorist groups in the country for a while, but our police forces found it hard to track them. They were prepared for everything we threw at them, including legilimency. More worrying, it's suspected they were secretly supported by centaur politicians and government officials. Fortunately, they are just as divided as we are, but sadly, they all agree in one thing. They don't want to be slaves any longer. From what we know, it seems they were organized by the local population of Marquesas, a small Muggle island stuck inside our territory, and obtained advanced weaponry and flying vehicles. Centaur warbands wearing the sign of the isolationists and the separationists were witnessed in their company, but those are mostly just tolerated. They didn't receive any Muggle equipment yet. They burned the plantation owners' mansions and hunted down several owners and their families, killing them in humiliating way. All the way from Marquesas to the capital, cities are burning or in human hands, but other settlements are yet to fall. Some of the population is loosely organized into militias, but most civilians simply fled into the forests. It's total chaos there. Weapons. Can you describe them to me? The centaur reached into a pocket and said, "Better yet, I can show one." He pulled out a small dark grey stick with a widening end and another metal part sticking out of it at its half length after a thinner part parallel to the main body, all 4-inch long, and said, "This and several others had been taken from ambushed Yahoo rebels and look like Geminio copies, all the same down to serial numbers and scratches. They had several types, but this seemed to be the most potent of them. It's been reduced 3 times by one of our wizards for concealed transport. Here, try it. We can't figure out how to operate." While he spoke, the merwizard quickly cast 3 engorgios on the weapon, took it in his hands, then proceeded to flip some switches and let loose a quick trio of deafeningly loud shots into the wall. For a few moments, the centaur stood completely still in shock, only blinking to keep the dust out of his eyes, then shouted, "Seen one before, I take it." Thiago muttered an unheard apology and quickly healed both their ear-drums. "Sorry, they are very loud indoors. I familiarized myself with the weapon and many of its kind some years ago in South America. This one is of French make and named Farmers. Crude, completely magicless, and deadly in anyone's hand, typical Muggle tools for fools. It can indeed be Geminioed, and if I were you, I'd not hesitate to do just that, and arm all your remaining troops with this. Got any armor?" Arihim looked doubtfully at the smoking holes in the wall. A loosened bit of plaster chose this moment to fall on the floor. Shuddering, he said, "Our troops have armor on their torsos, but its reinforcement magic is designed against arrows with cursed tips, not this. Our wizards could modify them, but they are too few, and our forces are too dispersed. And while armor might hold against penetration, helmets are useless. Such an impact is more than enough to break one's neck if the head is hit. On the bright side, the rebels are completely unarmed. What do you suggest?" The merwizard collected his thoughts. "You certainly need outside help. I'd suggest hiring human mercenaries, but they demand a lot of gold for fighting against their own species. Hiring certain merpeople tribes to attack human supply ships is a possibility, but that also requires investments to make their weapons adequately potent. Hiring wizard supremacists could work, but their ideologies usually contain parts that are unfortunate for us. You should call for help from any anti-human faction you find. Some giants, and the goblins are a good possibility too. I'd leave other centaurs out of this. They might side with the rebel factions. And if you'd like, my city can provide both advisors and 5,000 merwizards, free of charge, hardened by a lifetime spent dueling, smartened by infiltrating humans, strengthened by don't being too proud to watch and learn. The only thing I ask is to keep this between your government and mine, better yet, you and us. It's for the best if no one else knows that merwizards exist and can take human form. Your superiors can know about us, but for anything else, we'll be volunteers from all around the world, coming to do what Atlantis and the consortium was too lazy to do." The centaur swallowed, then repeated it to make sure he haven't misheard something. 5,000 battle mages for free. It sounds too good to be true. Thiago smiled and replied, "Someday, and that day may never come, we'll call upon you to do a service for us. But until that day, accept this assistance as a gift from people who want to be your friends." Chapter 318. Moving Target Portkey. Monday, August 12, 1996, Texas Roadhouse Restaurant, Jacksonville, North Carolina, United States of America. Susanna Thomas leaned over, elbows on the table. That steak sounds delicious, Linda. Thank you for treating me. Is there anything I can do for you in return? Linda Warren nodded. As a matter of fact, there is. I was wondering if you would be able to do me a favor. I need to conduct an experiment, and I think your car will help get a first test off the ground. Susanna blinked. A car? You have a car of your own, don't you? Linda hesitated before she responded. I do have a car, but we're going to need both cars for this experiment. An experiment which will need for me to let you in on a little secret. Susanna grinned. A secret? Tell me. I thought I'd known most of your secrets by now. Working at the Science Museum has been good for the two of us. First, what's the experiment you were thinking of? Linda drew a deep breath before continuing. I want to send something from my car to your car while both cars are moving in opposite directions. Can't you just hand it to me? What's so experimental about that? Linda stared at her intently. It's not going to be done by hand. It's going to be done via Portkey. The experiment is going to see whether a Portkey can be sent to a moving target. Susanna paused a good 10 seconds before responding. A Portkey? That's one of the magical transportation options, is it not? Linda nodded. That's it. What's more, we even have a witch to create the Portkey. You actually know a witch? Cool. Do I know her? Yes, as a matter of fact, you do. Where does she live? Linda grinned. Here in Jacksonville. In fact, unless something very bizarre has transpired, she's not far from you at the moment. Susanna giggled. I want to talk to her about magic and stuff. About how far away is she right now? Linda shrugged. About 5 feet. It took a second or two for the implication to register in Susanna's mind, but register it did. Susanna stared in shock as she whispered, Linda, you're a witch. Yes, I am. Until the statute of secrecy fell, I was not allowed to reveal that. However, now I can come out and show the world magical things. I've got some interesting ideas to advance a certain field of science, and this first experiment will get them off the ground. What are you thinking of? Linda told her in a whisper, and Susanna put her hands to her face in shock and eventually nodded. I see where you're going. Since the target's going to be moving relative to the source, you need to make certain that the Portkey will actually arrive with the target's velocity instead of the source's. Exactly. This test requires that the source and destination be traveling in distinct trajectories. Cars going in opposite directions will do that. Susanna's eyebrows shot up. Do you think it will work? Linda nodded. I believe so. Remember that any 2 points on the rotating Earth are, at any given moment, accelerating in different directions, so there will always be some difference between the source and destination's trajectories. Furthermore, the nuclear attacks showed that there was no problem portkeying weapons north and south. North and south, why does that matter? Because the Earth rotates at different speeds depending on your latitude. Relative to the center of the planet, the equator rotates at about 1,000 mph. Sending something from the equator due north to somewhere in northern Europe can result in a relative speed difference of 500 mph, even if the acceleration vectors on the surface are the same. Believe me, we'd have heard of portkeyed objects arriving at their destination, only to start zipping off in random directions at very high rates of speed. What about if you're not on the surface? Maybe the portkeys will only work on the Earth's surface. The next experiment will involve a plane, provided this one succeeds. Susanna grunted in appreciation and thought for a moment. What exactly are you going to be, sending me? In response, Linda reached into her bag and brought out a small stuffed animal. I'll be sending you Penny over here. She's small enough to sit in your back seat without distracting you. However, you may hear a strange noise when the portkey arrives. Be ready for that. Susanna looked at the stuffed animal. This will magically materialize in the back seat of my car. The middle of your back seat, on the driver's side, more precisely. If everything goes as planned, she'll sit in the middle of the seat and won't move. If, however, she arrives with a velocity different from your car's, she'll wind up flying in some weird direction and will appear in a different location when you check if she's there. You see, I'm trying to make sure that she won't fly into your field of view when she arrives and distract you. A stuffed animal suddenly jumping into the front row between the two seats will do that. Susanna grew wary. I don't want this thing hitting me all right. Would it make sense to use something with less mass, like a napkin? Linda nodded. I had considered a napkin, in fact. However, the fact is that napkins won't travel very far before they're slowed by air resistance. The whole point of the exercise is to see not just if the stuffed animal gets there, but if it's moving relative to your car when it arrives. Rest assured, if it does jump forward, it will hit the back seat and not hurt you. 45 minutes later, the meal was over. Susanna started heading over to her car and was surprised to see Linda following her. She asked, "Aren't you going to head back to your car? What are you following me for? And why are you holding that receipt instead of throwing it out?" Linda looked at the receipt. "I'm going to need to be able to see the destination in order to send a Portkey there. I'll place this receipt on the seat and take a mental snapshot of that. Once I do that, I'll be able to send the stuffed animal to a location on the receipt." The two women walked over to Susanna's car, and Susanna opened the back door. Linda got in, placed the receipt in the middle of the back seat behind the driver, and took a good hard look at it. Satisfied, she shut the door and pointed at the back seat. "As you see, the stuffed animal is not there when you're leaving." Susanna nodded. "I can see that." Linda started walking back to her car, penny in hand. "Good. Now start heading northeast on 17 while I start heading southwest. In 20 minutes, we both should be out of most of the traffic, so we'll both be moving. I'll send the Portkey over then. Then we'll return to the restaurant, and I can have my stuffed animal back. Wish me luck." Susanna did so and got into her car. 15 minutes later, she was on 17 and traveling at a good clip. Barely able to contain her excitement and keep her eyes on the road, she listened for strange sounds coming from the back seat. Nothing happened for 5 minutes or so. Suddenly, she heard a brief snapping sound behind her. There weren't any thuds or anything like that, nor was there any sound of things moving around in the back seat. That was probably a good sign. She pulled over to the side of the road as soon as she safely could, got out of the car, and walked over to the back seat. There was Penny sitting right on top of the receipt. She seemed to have landed on her face, but that was probably a minor complication, if that. Letting out a whoop of joy, she turned around at the next opportunity and headed back to the restaurant. Linda arrived shortly after she did. The witch was about to open her mouth when Susanna brought her hand out from behind her back and showed her the stuffed animal. "It worked, Linda. It really worked. It landed on its face, but it got there and arrived right on the receipt." Linda was ecstatic. Giving Susanna a hug, she took back the stuffed animal. "That's wonderful. I might be onto something here. The reason she landed on her face was because she had fallen over in my front seat before I sent her to you. She arrived face down, facing front." Susanna nodded. "That's right. That's good, right?" Linda beamed. "This means that I ironed out one of the kinks of Portkey travel, troublesome arrivals. Let's hope it scales up. Well, Susanna, it looks like the plane is next." "Indeed it is. Good luck, Linda." Chapter 319. Linear are Deciphered. Monday, August 12, 1996, Department of Linguistics, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, United States of American postdoc. Yuan Tao hurriedly clicked away his Netrek window when he heard the knock on the door. He had barely gotten back to his work when his advisor entered the room, followed by a very odd-looking man. It took him a few seconds for him to realize that it wasn't a man. It was a merperson. The fellow seemed to be a bit taller than ordinary humans, and he was scratching his arms and tail a lot. Apparently his species didn't like coming out of the water that much. It looked as if he had picked up an itch or a patch of dry skin. Adams, the advisor, looked extremely excited, and Yuan couldn't blame him. How many people could actually get a chance to speak with a merperson? He could only hope that this particular man spoke English. Adams was barely able to speak. Tao, I've got a really interesting project you may want to help me with if you get a chance. I have with me Professor Roge Zillers of the Blue Star tribe of the Merpeople. They're based in Lake Winapsauki. Professor Zillers, this is Yuan Tao, one of my students. Yuan's jaw dropped. Wait a minute, there's a tribe of Merpeople up in New Hampshire. Apparently so. Let's head on over to the swimming pool so this guy here can actually talk. Their vocal cords are such that their voices sound like screeching tires when they speak in air. And trust me, Tao, you don't want to hear that. Intrigued by this development, they all headed over to the swimming pool. Zillers got several curious stares when he walked through the corridors, but he apparently took them in stride. Tao suddenly realized something. Do we need a towel? Also, I need to get my suit. Don't bother, Tao. We've got an underwater microphone system set up for two-way communication. He jumps in and talks normally. They reached the pool, startling the receptionist at the front desk. Everyone headed in through the men's locker room, and within 30 seconds, Zillers was underwater again. Yuan was curious how articulate these fellows were. The first few words weren't promising, they sounded like expletives in an unknown language. They were promptly followed by, "What in the name of the gods did you put in this water? It smells like my teenage son has been trying to cook, and it irritates my eyes." Adams gave himself a face slap. The chlorine, whoops, he's probably not accustomed to that. Wonderful first contact there. He headed over to a microphone off the deep end and explained. There was a pause, and Zillers said, "What's wrong with plants in the water? They help us." Adams didn't want this to get onto a tangent. "Professor, we'll discuss it later. Let's deal with the issue at hand right now. Dr. Yuan here wants to know about your tribe in the lake. Scientists in your culture go by their first names. How odd. At any rate, we do have a small community up there. It's pretty quiet, although occasionally one of the kelpies gets out of hand and starts causing a mess on the surface." Yuan winced and cut him off. "Yuan is my last name, Professor. In my culture, the family name is mentioned first. What is a kelpie?" Kelpies are large creatures with sinuous necks and flippers. They're supposed to stay underwater, away from the Muggles, but sometimes they misbehave and attract undue attention. Sounds like the Loch Ness Monster, Yuan thought. He wouldn't be at all surprised if all big lakes had communities like this in them. Fascinating. Do you have any pictures or evidence of them? The zoologists will want to take a look at these creatures. Not yet, Dr. Yuan. However, we'll probably have some out within 6 months or so. We've just introduced ourselves to the world, and our elder has agreed that we need to break the news to the Muggles of the area gradually. After all, what would you have done if you saw a 20-foot monster coming towards you in the water? Adams chuckled. I see your point, Professor. At any rate, Tao, back to the issue at hand here. You like old languages, right? Yuan nodded. I do, Professor. Adams, I'm working on that Anatolian project right now. Why do you ask? In response, Adams handed over a folder full of photocopied documents. Professor Zillers has just given us access to many documents written in Mermish, the language of the Merpeople. It shows the evolution of Mermish over a long period of time, supposedly thousands of years. The microphone spoke again. We chose MIT because it is nearby and one of the best linguistic schools in this part of the Muggle world. In return, we got copies of old Muggle books written in English. Beowulf, some tales from a town in New Hampshire named Canterbury, Hamlet, and something called Ulysses, which I think comes from the Trojan War. Yuan nodded. That's definitely a good start, Professor Zillers. Those are very famous English works of literature spanning almost 1,000 years. You'll have a lot to work with there. I take it you can read our writing as well as speak it. Yes, Dr. Yuan. Can you read our writing? Yuan looked at his advisor, who grimaced. I can't, Dr. Yuan. I've never seen this alphabet before. Tao, do you recognize it? Tao had a sinking feeling about this as he opened up the folder and took a look at the first document. It had a note on it claiming that it had been written around 1600 BC. He stared back at the pool. You've been in that lake for 3,600 years. Zillers climbed out of the pool to look at the document. Screeching to himself, he nodded and jumped back in. Oh, that one. That's one of the old documents. It pertains to the Second Judgment Day, if I recall. The one where that Hittite idiot let that plague of control. However, to answer your question, this particular document comes from an important book of historical texts, which is a common household item in our culture. It is roughly on the same level as your Bible. Impressed, Yuan looked down to see the writing itself. The chicken scratches down there looked like nonsense to him. There were a few pictograms here and there, but nothing that really stood out. This would be a tough task, he thought. Yuan held up the first page. I assume we'll be working together with this, all three of us. Both Adams and Zillers nodded, though Adams warned Yuan. Hope you like this pool, Tao. You'll probably be here for a while. Yuan glared at Adams but didn't say anything. He turned back to the microphone. What does this say? First, say it in your words, then say it in my words. Zillers shook his head. Can someone send a copy of the document down here? In response, Adams rummaged through his back, brought out a waterproof copy of the text, and threw it into the pool. Kiparupe dikasi, padokuru dupyo setaja. Yuan cut in. What does it mean? In the days of Father Dickacy, elder of Setoj. Adams's reaction was most unusual. He gasped, excused himself, and ran out the door. The other two men watched him leave, after which Yuan pointed down at the document. The words sound familiar, but I can't place them. Maybe Professor Adams can. At any rate, can you point out which pictogram means what? We can start with that. Zillers nodded. Sure. First, keep in mind that there aren't spaces between the words and the words read right to left, top to bottom. It's also somewhat tonal, and the tone marks tend to get skipped unless it's impossible to determine from context. Now, let's begin. The first symbol there, with the arrow, indicates the start of a word. The next one is a warbling kai, and there's supposed to be a triangle over it which isn't there. For the most part, it's what you call a syllabary, with one symbol per syllable. The two men had been working for about half an hour when Yuan heard a veritable stampede coming in from both locker rooms. Looking up, he noticed that Adams had returned with virtually the entire department focusing on ancient Greek languages. Zillers stuck his head out of the pool to take a look. Yuan stared at Adams in confusion. Professor Adams, what's going on? Do they recognize the language? Adams didn't say anything. Instead, he asked one of the newcomers to step forward. Professor Zillers, I apologize for bothering you. However, we may have documents in a language similar to this. Would you be able to verify that they are the same language? Zillers hesitated for a moment. I'm not sure, sir. This text we were studying is in ancient Mermish, and I speak modern Mermish. The alphabet's a little different now, as you'll see in the other documents, and if the word doesn't appear in the ancient texts, I won't know what its ancient equivalent is. That should be sufficient, Professor. At any rate, I'm going to say some words to you. Tell me if you recognize them. All right. Okay, here we go. Assassrum. Gods help us. I can barely understand it spoken in the air. However, from what I can tell, I believe that's an ancient alcoholic beverage, but I'll double-check. Also in the text, it means debt. I don't recognize that offhand. However, it's very similar to the modern word teja, which means the numeral 5. The interrogation went on for 5 more minutes, and it was soon obvious that the people in the back had encountered the Mermish language before, and were getting very interested in the proceedings. Zillers laughed and said that it would make things a lot easier. Adams explained, You're not going to believe this, but we recognize the words, Professor. However, the texts we have aren't using the same alphabet. Whoever wrote the texts we have appears to have transliterated ancient Mermish into another alphabetic system. They seem to do a lot of transliteration. They've transliterated some Greek texts as well. Yuan stared at Adams in disbelief. You mean to tell me we've already gotten some ancient Mermish texts? That's amazing. Which language is Mermish related to? In response, Adams held a book up in the air. Yuan looked at it and nearly fainted. He was barely able to eke out, "Are you telling me?" Adams nodded excitedly. "Yes, Tao. Everything makes a lot of sense, especially if you think that Crete is in the Mediterranean and surrounded by water. In other words, merpeople. One of linguistics' greatest mysteries appears to have been solved." He threw his hands up to the sky in exhilaration. Linear is ancient Mermish. No wonder we didn't get it. The statute of secrecy would have prevented it. Yuan couldn't believe it. If this was indeed true, this would be a great discovery. However, the transliteration troubled him. This would indeed be a great discovery if this is true. However, the fact that the linear are documents, and these documents use different alphabets, is troubling. Something doesn't seem right. Who would be transliterating both Greek and Mermish into a third alphabet? They'd have to be wizards pretty near Greece, since they... The answer came to everyone in the room at once. Atlantis, Harold Green Pharmaceutical Corporation, Charleston, United States of America. Daniel Green looked hard at the new wizard. "All right, Antonio, you're sure you know what to do with this? From what I recall of the instructions, they're hard to follow." Antonio shrugged. "I'm an alchemist, Mr. Green. I know what I'm doing." "You're willing to swear an unbreakable oath that the stone will not leave this building?" Antonio shook his head. "Judging from what happened to your predecessor, that may not be a good idea. Would an oath saying that I will not do anything to help the stone leave the building suffice?" Green nodded. "That's close enough as far as I'm concerned. You will also swear that any stone you create will become property of Harold Green Pharmaceutical Corporation." "I will, Mr. Green." "Good. Let me go get the instructions so you can start working on the stone. I'll be right back." Antonio looked around the room and pointed at a computer on a desk. "You haven't stored the instructions on the computer?" "No, Antonio. Computers can be hacked and they can lose power. Besides, we've already learned from our experience with Hendrickson that unscrupulous wizards can delete files. Go ahead and get lunch now. I'll be back with the information in about an hour." Antonio smiled and shook Green's hand. "That's a good idea, Mr. Green. I'm famished." "Do you need help finding the cafeteria?" Antonio held up a brown paper bag which appeared to have something in it. "Don't bother, Mr. Green. I've brought my own lunch." Green shrugged and left the room. Antonio watched him leave, and once the man was out the door, Antonio pulled out his wand and conjured up a patronus. Big thicket facility. Shauna Santana spoke with the glowing turtle for a moment and nodded. The patroness disappeared as she turned and faced the rest of her team. "That was Antonio. Green just left the building, and we have about an hour to pull this off. How's the tracking spell coming?" One of the auras gave her a thumbs up. "He just left the building, ma'am. I don't know where he's going yet, however. Did Antonio say anything about it?" "No, Vicky. Just review your plans for getting into the places which seem to be most likely from his current travel plan." Another aura frowned. "I'll follow orders, ma'am. However, I must admit that I'm starting to wonder if this is legal." "We have a warrant, Joe. Besides, we all know how important the stone is. Think of it this way. We're doing the public a service by making sure that the elixir of life goes to the Red Cross, which needs it most and won't try to profit from it. We're not going to destroy the instructions. We're going to still keep making stones." Santana shook her head. "I spoke with Ariadne about this at length and eventually convinced her. Once we have the instructions, we confiscate them and send Green back with an incorrect set and with a Geminiode stone which won't work." We bring the instructions down into the Department of Mysteries and create a stone. This stone never leaves the Department of Mysteries, Joe. All that the people see will be the elixir of life, which will go to the Red Cross, and only to the Red Cross. Joe nodded. I see where you're going. The Red Cross is almost certainly going to use it to heal injuries and not make people immortal, and by holding on to the stone, we've made it means no one can make the elixir without going through us or the Pentagon. Exactly. In the meantime, we work with the stone and see if we can modify it to produce something which can cure cancer and do nothing else. If we do that, we start supplying Harold Green with it at the same price one of his hired alchemists would have cost. Harold Green is betting everything on this cure for cancer, people. They've invested a lot in it, and even though I personally detest, Mr. Green were honor-bound to provide them with a replacement for their cancer cure if we take theirs. Clever, ma'am. Are you going to recruit Nicholas Flamel? Santana shook her head. Dr. Flamel is extremely busy right now as Minister of Magic, so he can't spend a lot of time working with us. He's promised he'll do what he can, though. Keep in mind that he's forgotten a lot of the recipe himself over the years. Hopefully, seeing the instructions will remind him. The room watched the displays in silence as the tracking spell followed Mr. Green around the city. Eventually, the signal became stationary and began moving at about 3 mph. Vicky looked at the display in excitement. He's stopped, gotten out of the car, and is walking now. This must be the place. Where is he? Bank of South Carolina, Main Street. Apparate over there now and stall him. Get into Muggle clothes and stand in line trying to open checking accounts and stuff. It's probably in the vault. We need to find out which vault it's in and grab it. Joe spun and stared at her. We can't just apparate into the bank like that. Everyone will see us. Vicky's voice was shrill. He's probably opening the door of the bank right now. Chairwoman Santana, we're running out of options if we want to do this in secret. Santana thought for a moment more. Suddenly, she smiled. I've just got a better idea. We'll only need a couple of people there. One to distract Green if necessary, and the other to swap in the falsified instructions. But how are we going to hold him there? Santana chuckled. Ever seen a car try to drive on completely blown tire? I'd say a Defindo spell will come in handy here. Bank of South Carolina Main Street. The security guard delivered the folder containing the replica of Flamel's diary to Green, obviously not knowing what it was. Green signed all the forms and told the staff he would be returning the object by the end of the day. The Department of Magic had failed again, and thanks to Antonio Poole, he would once again have access to the Philosopher's Stone. He headed over to the car, put the folder in the trunk, and began heading out of the lot. He had gotten maybe 20 feet before he realized something was terribly wrong. Pulling into another parking spot, he inspected the vehicle and saw that the passenger's side front tire had blown. Green swore. This was not a good time for it, particularly since the spare tire was in the trunk with the diary and he didn't know how to change a tire. He had hoped to not call AAA. He was concerned that the Department of Magic could be tracking him, and once the information about the tire change was in the database, they could conceivably take the diary. He decided that he was going to move the diary to a different bank after this was done. He was pondering what to do when another car passed him, slowed, and then parked a few spaces away. A man got out and came over. Hello there, I see your tire is flat. Need a hand with it. I know how to change a tire. Green whistled. It looked like he was going to get out of this. Trying to hide his relief, he nodded at the Good Samaritan. If you can help, that would be most appreciated. No problem. Where's the spare? Green gestured towards the trunk. In the trunk, I'll get it. Green headed to the trunk, put the folder on the side for a moment, pulled out the tire, and put the folder back in the trunk. He then slammed the trunk, shut the second agent. The one who had blown the tire watched Flamel move around the folder from under the invisibility cloak. All he needed to do was get his hands on that folder. Once he did that, he could swap diaries and be done with it. Opening and resealing the folder with magic would be a cinch. The trick was getting the folder without opening the trunk, as that would be a dead giveaway. He looked towards his accomplice, hoping the accomplice would know what to do. He had no reason to worry, however. The accomplice had this down pat. The first agent turned to Green. "Do you have a jack in the trunk?" Green nodded. "I'll go get it." The second agent pulled out his wand as Green approached the back of the vehicle. He popped the trunk and pulled out the jack. He was about to slam the door when the accomplice called over, "Keep it open for the time being. We may need stuff from it later on, oil and so forth." Green hesitated for a moment, then shrugged and slammed the door. "I've got some valuables in the trunk, sir. I don't want to lose them." The first agent looked around. "No one's here, sir. I'll keep an eye on things for you. Now bear with me here. The tire's going to have to come off. See this wrench here? We're going to need to get those lug nuts off. If we work together, we'll be able to get you on your way more quickly. Go back into the trunk and see if you can find a wrench. You take 2 nuts and I take 2. And this time, keep the door open in case there are more complications." Green walked over to the back of the car again, popped the lid, and fished around for the wrench. He eventually found it, moved to the front of the car, bent down, and began fighting with the lug nuts. The second agent smiled. It was showtime. Thanking his boss for teaching him non-verbal magic, he pointed his wand at the back of the car and cast his spell. The package flew out of the trunk and into his hand. Unsealing the folder, he withdrew its contents. It was the diary. Bingo. And it looked just like the fake, except that the fake had instructions for making a magical talking fish. Keeping an eye on the work on the tire, he stuffed the fake diary into the folder, resealed it, and levitated the folder back into the trunk. The entire operation had taken 10 seconds, if that. His mission complete, he apparated back to Big Thicket with his prize in hand, even with 2 people working on the tire. It took a good half-hour to change it. Eventually, though, he got it done. He thanked his visitor profusely, put the shredded tire back in the trunk, thankfully the diary was still there, and drove back to the office. He had eventually managed to convince his new friend to close the trunk door again shortly after withdrawing the wrench. The friend couldn't imagine what was so valuable, but he didn't want to pry and readily agreed. Antonio was waiting for him at the office. Grinning like a maniac, Green handed the diary over to him. "Sorry I'm late. I got a flat tire en route. Here it is, Antonio. You can have it just long enough to make the stone. Once you're done, it's going back where it came from." Antonio nodded. "I'll do that. I'll have the stone for you by the end of the day." Green nodded and left the room. Making sure the cameras weren't on him, Antonio pulled one of the fake stones off of the shelf and Gemini'd it. He then put the fake stone back where it had been and put the new copy in the bag. Finally, he poured a couple of flasks of mercury into the hazardous waste bin. After waiting a couple of hours and goofing around with some of the beakers and stuff in front of the camera, he called Green and told him everything was ready. Making sure his body was blocking the camera, he dumped the contents of the bag onto the table. Out came the fake stone, accompanied a large amount of leprechaun gold, which was set to disappear in about 15 hours. Green came in, and Antonio pointed at the desk. "Mission accomplished, Dr. Green. There's your stone and proof that it works. The mercury has been changed into gold, just as Flamel said." Green punched his fist in the air. "Thank you, Antonio. You've been a great help. Now, if you don't mind, can you give me the book back? I need to put it back in a safe place." Antonio shrugged. "Fine with me. We've both gotten what we want, it seems. However, can I make at least one suggestion? Can I keep the gold?" Flamel shrugged. "I don't see why not. You certainly deserve it." Perfect, Antonio thought. The last possible complication had been dealt with. Now Green wouldn't bat an eye if he saw the gold missing. Piece of cake. All they had to do was corral Hendrickson, and the stone was out of play completely near the shores of northwest Howienhamland. The honor guard of Rock-to-Rattle merpeople and Howienhamland centaurs stood at attention as Ambassador Arihim appeared in the air-bubbled Portkey network station, but stared openly at the human wizard accompanying him. The merwizard known as Wizard Thiago, a bitter from Chile, glared at them. The tension was broken by one of the centaurs, a wizard himself. "You're back sooner than we anticipated, Ambassador. Your search for allies was successful, I take it." Careful not to tell anything he didn't want to share with the Portkey Station's merpeople crew, he replied. "Yes, but I was away from my homeland's forests for too long. I'd like to return there now." The centaur wizard nodded in understanding, then frowned as he glanced at the human standing by the ambassador's side. "Is he with you, sir? Mr. Abitter is my honored guest. Can you grant him the mock now?" Arihim replied. His wizard compatriot nodded and conjured an amulet, a plain black coin on a red string. He gave it to the human and instructed him, "Push its middle with your finger. Now, its inscription will turn silver and will stay so until you're wearing it. Do not take it down until you leave our land. Without it, we must consider you compromised and your identity and your freedom forfeit. Such is the law for humans." Thiago did so and said, "Thank you, good sir. I'll keep it in mind." "Now are we ready to go?" The centaur wizard nodded again, then motioned to them to hold on to his arms. As they did so, he apparated out. They rematerialized on the edge of a mountain summit, overlooking slopes of hills covered by lush rainforest, thinning northwards to form a peninsula. Treeless expanses, farmland and cities dotted the forest, smoke rising from many. Fear crossed Arihim's face as he asked his compatriot, "Are those our manors and towns burning? Has Rajahim also fallen then?" "None of that," the centaur maid reassured him. "The governor and the local garrison stayed loyal to us and proven to be surprisingly competent." He ordered the bridges between the province and the capital destroyed, and organized a loyalist militia to patrol the mountain passes and the forest. He also kept the Yahoos from rebelling in force and cooperating with the traitors. He declared that, for every loyalist centaur killed, 10 random Yahoos will be executed. The smoke you see is in fact piles of bodies burning. Thiago spoke for the first time. "I see your leadership doesn't hesitate to make hard decisions. Good. If you bring whoever is legally in charge here, we can get down to business. I have an army waiting for permission to apparate in." The centaur wizard looked at him quizzically, but ultimately apparated away when Arihim nodded at him reassuringly. Some minutes later, he returned with 2 others in ornate armor, showing high rank. They introduced themselves as Vice President Kitnam and Roghim Province's Governor Tiashin. With the president captured by the rebels, the former held his authority. The latter was brought along as a recognition for his competence. Naturally, they had some questions to ask. "So you say your people aren't human at all? How can we trust you without knowing who you are, where you came from, and what you want?" Thiago expected these questions and responded calmly. "I can reassure you by truth, saying enforced by unbreakable oath, that what I said about our identity is true. Our intention is to help your government restore order, for which we'll only ask a favor in the uncertain future. All I can say about my origins is that I come from Trapananda, known to your kind as the Wandering City from legends. Any attempt to divulge the location of the city would claim my life by unbreakable oath, and the same goes for my compatriots." The centaurs thought it over. "Good enough for me," said Tiashin. "Tell me about the assistance you can provide," the merwizard told them. "My city offered 5,000 of our finest wizards. They will arrive from a secure location, already transfigured into human form and outfitted with the necessary provisions, including invisibility cloaks and brooms. Sadly, our surface magic cannot provide friendly fire management for invisibility spells, but even so, these will come handy. A handful of specialists will also arrive, the first myself being already here. We will bring some Muggle weapons and the expertise required to train your people to use them." The centaurs were surprised. Muggle weapons. Where did you learn to use them? Thiago responded. I'm not allowed to share specific information, but in general, we infiltrated any organization, be it wizard or muggle, that we could. Given our natural appearances, and the fact that we are unable to use polyjuice potion to impersonate other humans, this means mostly South and Central America, and organizations that can't run too detailed background checks. In practice, this includes several armed insurrectionist groups, hence the weapons and the familiarity with them. While we have no experience leading a Muggle army, we can train your troops to use their weapons. The Houyhnhnms liked what they heard. When will they arrive? The response. I already notified them yesterday, and they are ready to Portkey in small groups in a moment's notice. All I need is your leader's permission to send them an authorized Portkey, and your wizard's help to outfit them with these marks, lest they cause friendly fire accidents with the locals, was much to their liking. The short and chaotic days of Yahoo dominance was about to come to an abrupt end. A new part started in the Civil War. The time of the wizards has come. Chapter 320. Nihim appeals to Hermione. Tuesday, August 13, 1996, Granger Residency outside London, England. Hermione Granger had finally managed to convince the paparazzi to leave her alone. Although she was getting more and more comfortable dealing with the press, she had to start getting ready for school. She had to get new robes, pick up her new spellbooks, and so forth. She had finished her internship at the dentist's office last Friday and was taking a couple of weeks off before going back to school. Her family had gone on several vacations to the north of England, and she had introduced the Grangers to Hogsmeade for the first time since the fall of the Statute of Secrecy. As she had expected, her father became hooked on butterbeer and had come home with a whole carton of it. She tried to think back to what had happened over the past year and could not believe how much had changed. At this time last year, she had been the only person in the area outside her immediate family who knew about the wizards. Voldemort had still been alive, Dumbledore had been in charge of Hogwarts, and she had just been an ordinary student, albeit a bright one. Very few people outside the wizarding world had known about her or Harry Potter. Atlantis had still been a legend, Gulliver's travels had still been fiction, and fighting had still been going on in the Middle East. Downtown London had still been intact, with now lost attractions like Big Ben, the Ministry of Magic, and Buckingham Palace. What a difference a year makes. Her train of thought was interrupted by a distinctive metallic pecking sound, which she recognized immediately as an owl or other flying creature pecking on the bug screen in the window. She turned to let the animal in and was astonished by what she saw. It was a dwarf hippogriff, holding a letter with an ornate seal on it. She immediately thought of Buckbeak and wondered how he was doing. Did he miss his owner? Buckbeak, who still went by Witherwings, as the exoneration of Sirius hadn't done anything to rescind the execution order, seemed to be happy with Harry. However, the hippogriff had spent a lot more time with Hagrid than with Harry. Hagrid probably missed him, and she believed the feeling was mutual. Wondering what the seal was, she accepted the message and gave the hippogriff a couple of nuts. The animal didn't leave immediately, however, a sign that she was supposed to reply. She took a look at the letter, and her eyes widened. The letter had been addressed to the headquarters of the Society for Preservation of Intelligent Welfare, and it bore the seal of the President of the Republic of the Houyhnhnms. She could only think of one explanation for this. Nihim was appealing to Spill for support in throwing out the Yahoos, or at least convince the Yahoos that the centaurs weren't as bad as they had seemed. What the hell was she supposed to do now? She suspected that Nihim didn't realize that she was turning 17 next month. The Houyhnhnm leader likely figured she was a major, experienced social justice activist. She had to admit that such a mistake would be easy to make given all the press she had gotten of late. She didn't have any experience in international politics. Hell, she hadn't done much with Spew itself over the past few years. If she sided with the centaurs, she would likely be branded a collaborator and be seen as an enemy of the humans. If she sided with the humans, on the other hand, she would be seen as betraying Spill and could possibly antagonize Nihim further. This could pose a problem if Nihim ever regained power. She unrolled the scroll, noticing that it was on parchment which bore the presidential letterhead, and that it was of higher quality than she had seen in her entire life. August 10, 298 AD 1996. Office of the Presidentsentor Republic of the Houyhnhnms. To Ms. Hermione Granger, founder and president of the Society for Preservation of Intelligent Welfare. Dear Ms. Granger, as you are undoubtedly aware by now, a great tragedy has struck the Centaur Republic. A Yahoo resistance group known as 2 Exceeds 4 inserted an agent into the Golden House and sabotaged the Protector, the device which has shielded us from the Muggle world since 20 AG. For the first time in almost 300 years, our fair land was made visible to the Muggle world. This hideous act of vandalism has had worldwide consequences. Over 150 cubic miles of water was forced into the atmosphere, an event which has altered weather patterns all over the globe and almost certain to impact the growing season in Houyhnhnmland. My wizards do not know how long this anomalous weather will last. However, from the little we can tell, there is no end in sight. However, that was not all. The destruction of the Protector had one even more terrible side effect. When our fair island reappeared, the gaps in the coverage of the Protector, which had been known to the Muggles as part of the Marquesas archipelago, suddenly found themselves part of Houyhnhnm territory, with nothing separating our people from the Muggles. Our humans flooded across the border and eventually managed to convey to the Marquesan natives the fact that the Centaurs have traditionally been in a higher class than the humans. Understandably, the Muggles in the Marquesas were angered by this, and they promptly provided weapons to the escaped Yahoos in solidarity. Our peace-loving people was caught completely off guard by these barbarians. Within a matter of a week, my government was overthrown. I was initially taken prisoner by the human revolutionaries. However, before they could do me harm, a group of centaur wizards rescued me and escorted me to the Houyhnhnm sector of the Dominion of Glubbdubdrib. I have taken advantage of the fact that the rebels cannot fly easily from Houyhnhnmland to Glubbdubdrib and have set up a government in exile for my people. Rest assured that I will do everything I possibly can to get this situation under control. There is little we can do from Glubbdubdrib, however, and Houyhnhnmland is slowly sliding into a long-term and bloody civil war. Many people in my government are willing to share power with humans if necessary. I have explained to my cabinet that in a world where Muggles can communicate instantaneously and the statute of secrecy no longer exists, maintaining the caste system will not only put my species in jeopardy, but may also destabilize the entire region. A fight between the humans and the centaurs could splinter the Gulliver consortium, and the fact that the Marquesas are tied to the Muggle Republic of France could cause this to escalate into a war between the Gulliver consortium and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. This would be a Muggle wizarding world war which could easily bring about the end of civilization due to the fact that the Judgment Day Protocol may not be used twice in 5 years. In case you are wondering why NATO and the consortium are not getting involved in the revolution, that is why. They have agreed that it may be necessary to sacrifice one nation in order to prevent the world from going up in flames once more. As you are undoubtedly aware, we centaurs are sentient and have a unique culture. I freely admit that Houyhnhnmland has some faults. The traditional subjugation of the Yahoos is one of the most obvious, and many attempts have been made to improve the lot of the humans over the years. However, traditions are difficult to change. We would like to remind you, however, that the whip is no longer used for punishment of the Yahoos, and that the Yahoos do get a small salary to compensate them for their work. We believe that some sort of compensation should be awarded to all of the Yahoos for the time they served in the underclass. We were also forced to concede that the Yahoos should have at least some time getting all of their anger out of their system. However, the rebels have gone far beyond what we believe is fair retribution. Not content with the government, they are doing their best to round up centaurs and put them to death using Muggle weapons. One of the aspects of this situation which is most troubling is that several of the human military officers who are now running what is left of Howiehamland have acknowledged that the revolution is getting out of hand. They are arguing that they should be content with taking over the government and forcing us to treat humans as equals. In particular, they have threatened to court-martial and execute any human who kills an unarmed centaur other than his or her immediate master. Unfortunately, the government is slowly losing control as the civil war expands. Centaurs and humans are killing each other at a dreadful rate. If this continues much longer, all of the centaurs in Howiehamland will be dead, and the humans from abroad will rush in and claim our territory as their own. In short, the humans are waging a campaign of genocide and intimidation against my species, precisely the type of activity the Society for Preservation of Intelligent Welfare was founded to prevent. Your organization seems to have done well so far with the elves and dolphins. Now it is time to help us. You need to convince the rest of the humans that we must not be slaughtered. As the saying goes, a first impression lasts a lifetime. We want the first Muggle impression of my people to be one of a stable, prosperous civilization which has lasted over 800 years and was one of the founding members of the Gulliver Consortium. We do not want to be seen as people who go out of their way to persecute Muggles. Our nation is threatened in a spiritual as well as in a physical manner. For the past 600 years, we have worshipped the 5 gods of earth, air, fire, water, and spirit. They have protected us over the centuries, and we owe them a great deal of gratitude. We would not be who we are today were it not for our devotion to them. Unfortunately, the Muggles appear to be intervening there as well. There are reports that a man named Father Neru Martinez has landed on the eastern side of the island and are teaching some of the Yahoos their stories about a man known as Jesus Christ. Although from what I have been told Jesus Christ was truly a great man and a credit to your species, Christian priests are well known for supplanting the spiritual background of other cultures with that of Jesus Christ. We are concerned that if Father Martinez, who appears to be from the country known as Peru, replaces our belief in the 5 gods with that of Jesus Christ, a major cornerstone of our culture will be lost forever. Ms. Granger, I appeal for you to call together a meeting of all of your chapters and urge their members to write to their political leaders. This bloodshed has to stop, and the only way to do that would be for someone to educate the humans that we are not the monsters we seem to be at first glance. I have sent a similar letter to Atlantis as well. Unfortunately, I do not expect much help from Atlantis. Recall that Atlantis cannot intervene in a nation's internal affairs, and the revolution in Howiehamland qualifies as an internal affair, particularly since all of the other major powers are not interfering. Furthermore, Atlantis cannot get involved unless it is at DEFCON 2, and at last report, the revolt in my land has raised the DEFCON status from 4 to 3. That is correct, only 3. I have authorized my government to provide you with any assistance necessary to accomplish this task. With our first ambassador, Rach, killed in the fighting, I am appointing you as interim ambassador. You should come to Gulliver as soon as possible to learn what you can about our culture. I hope to hear from you soon, Ms. Granger. You and people designated by you may visit Gulliver at any time simply by presenting this document with my seal on it. As a free token of our appreciation, you may keep this dwarf hippogriff named Silver Moth as a pet or as a familiar. She is from Lilliput and is a typical example of one of the dwarf animals there. May the 5 gods be with us all. Sincerely. Nihim, president of the Howieham's Hermione, collapsed in horror. What was she going to do now? Flamel. She had to talk to Flamel and hope that he wasn't busy working with or chasing down Hendrickson, and the Stone. She had set up Spew to help Darby and save a few dolphins. It had never dawned on her that it could turn into a major international organization. She knew deep down inside that she had to help Nihim. The problem was that she was underage and didn't have enough real-world experience. Bloody hell, she couldn't even apparate yet. She put her head in her hands. For the first time in a long, long time, Hermione Granger was out of her league. Chapter 321, Guinevere's Flying Carpets. Wednesday, August 14, 1996, Chestnut Hill, Malnewton, Massachusetts, United States of America. Jason Morgenstern still didn't have a job, and he was starting to get worried. He had, though, that a MIT degree would be an extremely valuable commodity when it came to looking for new jobs. Unfortunately, the recession was still continuing. Granted, the stock market had stabilized around 2,800. However, the economists didn't see it going up anytime soon. If there was a silver lining, it was that oil prices had stabilized somewhat now, that the Middle East was starting to settle down. Although the Hamas civilian organization had gone out of its way to help some of the Israelis, it would take a long time, probably decades, for all of the bad blood between the Palestinians and the Israelis to disappear. Most of the issues which were left involved the land grabs Egypt and Iraq had made after Judgment Day. Gas was still hovering around $2.85 a gallon, which was still extremely pricey. Thankfully, he didn't drive much, so he didn't have to worry about shelling out money for that. He had asked Guinevere and Kurchatova to do what he could to help him. Unfortunately, both witches had refused. Although conceivably it would be possible for them to make sure he got a particular job, it A, would be unethical to do so when so many people were out of work, and B, it was quite possible that he might not be able to perform the required tasks when push came to shove. Jason was an MIT graduate, but one who was still untested. Guinevere had told him to not lose hope, as she and Kurchatova apparently had something up their sleeves which might help him somewhat. She wouldn't say what it was, however, until the two women were sure that their plan would work. That had been 2 or 3 weeks ago. Jason hadn't heard any more about the witch's mysterious plans until about 9:00 this morning, when Guinevere apparated into his apartment with a big smile on her face. She had explained that the plan appeared to have succeeded, and that she might have an opportunity for him. Guinevere had simply chuckled and said, "We're in business." When he asked her to explain, she simply repeated the same 3 words. Had the two women founded a company? How would they staff it, and how would Kurchatova manage to juggle graduate school, teaching 19, and working for this company at the same time? Granted, she was brilliant, but she couldn't do everything. Guinevere forestalled all his questions when she grabbed onto his arm and apparated him over to the Chestnut Hill Mall. Jason didn't like being apparated. He felt as if he were being squeezed through a tube of toothpaste, and half of the time he nearly vomited when he arrived at his destination. All the nausea fled from his system, however, when he saw where Guinevere had taken him. He, Guinevere, and Kurchatova were standing in the middle of what appeared to be a crate and barrel store. This particular chain sold various household products, glassware, silverware, tables, and so forth. Apparently, they picnic blankets and rugs as well. He found himself staring at a large pile of rugs standing against the wall. He looked at a price tag and was astonished to see that a 4x6 rug was going for $399.95. He pointed at the rugs in disbelief. Rugs that size for $400? Who would buy such a thing? Is everything in this store expensive like this? They don't seem to be very high quality either. Guinevere chuckled. They don't have to be high quality, Jason. Take a look at the sign hanging from the ceiling. Jason looked up and nearly fell over when he read the sign. Guinevere's Flying Carpet Safe and Secure Magical Transport Small, 4x6, 1 person, $399.95. Medium, 6x9 holds 2 people, $699.95. Large, 9x12, holds 5 people, $1,199.95. Maximum height, 68. Guinevere looked at him and chuckled. Well, what do you think? Jason could barely speak. Ah, how? Kerchatova giggled. We bought a bunch of cheap carpets and enchanted them. We'd have tried the duplication charm, except that the spell has been tabooed, so we can't use it. Do they actually fly? Yup, we tested each of them out before we brought them here. Jason whistled. Have any of them sold yet? A woman's voice answered. Only one so far, a small. However, a lot of people have been looking at them. Jason turned and faced the newcomer, who explained that she was one of the main sales managers here. Judging from what Guinevere has told me, they're going to be a surefire hit. They're much cheaper than cars, are eco-friendly, and are good for a short trip. You won't even get rained on. Jason turned back to Guinevere. How did you manage that? She shrugged. Impervious charm activates as soon as it becomes airborne. It prevents rain from falling in and, more importantly, prevents people from falling out. What's the maximum height for? The impervious charm protects an area 8 feet high starting at the surface of the rug. We were concerned that if people are standing during a trip and jump for some reason, they'll hit their head on the top and injure themselves. We're witches, not lawyers. He glanced back at the sales manager. You've already sold one. Wow, how much money did you make off of it, Guinevere? $200. We get half the proceeds. The store gets the other half. How much did it cost to buy the rug? Guinevere grinned. $39.95. We just bring the rugs over after we enchant and test them. Want to take one out for a test flight? We'll take one of the big ones. It will support all 3 of us, and it will serve as a pretty good advertising tool. Jason grinned. This I've got to see. Can I fly it? If it's designed for Muggles, it would make more sense for a Muggle to fly it. Kerchatova rolled her eyes. Trust a geek to think like that. Sure, go ahead. You would likely be a very good test subject. The instructions are written on the bottom of the rug. She pulled out one of the big rugs and turned it over. Instructions for use. Flying carpet version 1. Sit in the center of the rug, inside the square. To go forward, touch the front of the rug outside the square. To go backwards, touch the back. To turn left, touch the left side of the rug. To turn right, touch the right side of the rug. To go up, touch the front side of the square itself. To go down, touch the back side of the square itself. To speed up, touch the right side of the square itself. To slow down, touch the left side of the square itself. Maximum speed is 20 mph. Do not drink and fly. Jason began salivating. I definitely want to try this out. Guinevere grinned and told the sales manager to announce that they were going to do a demo of the rugs. The sales manager ran off to make the announcement as Jason grabbed a big rug with the bed and bath label still on it, apparently, and carried it into the central atrium. The Chestnut Hill Mall was an ideal place to demonstrate the rug. It had a large open area surrounded by stores and a glass ceiling far above. It was completely enclosed, so there would be no wind to interfere with the demo. By the time everyone had made their way out onto the rug, a good 10 people had gathered outside Crate and Beryl. Telling everyone else to move out of the way, the 3 of them sat in the square. Hoping that this would work, Jason touched the front end of the square. The rug slowly began to rise into the air, eliciting applause from the people in the store. The applause suddenly began to spread throughout the mall as people began looking towards them to see what was causing all the excitement. Guinevere pointed at the far end of the atrium. Head over there so everyone can see you. Remember, forward is the front of the rug. Jason put his hand down on the front of the rug, and it immediately ceased its ascent and began moving forward. He looked down in disbelief at the stores and people sliding by under him. At this point, virtually everyone in the immediate area was looking at him. Kerchatova nodded. So far, so good. Let's scare everyone by having him run into that wall over there. Jason spun and stared at her. Are you out of your mind? Guinevere nodded. She isn't. Trust me, do this. Dubiously, Jason accelerated forward and headed towards the wall. 10 feet from the wall, however, he found the rug slowing of its own volition. Eventually, it came to a halt, touching the wall. Guinevere explained, "It's smart enough to make sure it doesn't crash into anything at high speed. I've seen flying carpets run into things at 10 mph and injure people. Those won't sell well." She made a circle with her hand. "Make a loop around the mall, and then go down to maybe 15 feet above the lower level and fly around down there. We want everyone to see us." He did that and chuckled as the people raced to follow him around the building. This was going to sell, all right. He flew around a bit more and eventually headed back to crate and barrel. He pressed the back of the square one last time, and the rug slowly made its way down to the ground. Kerchatova stuck her hand over the side when it touched the ground and confirmed that the impervious field was gone. She got off, and the other two riders followed. The applause was deafening. The sales manager had to wait a good 15 seconds before it had quieted enough for her to get a pitch in. "That, ladies and gentlemen, is the first public demonstration of one of Guinevere's flying carpets, now on sale in this store, starting at $399.95. Hurry before they sell out." Jason, the two witches, and the salesperson walked back into the store, followed by a horde of potential customers. Many of them were turned away by the high price. However, Jason watched as they sold 5 smalls, 2 mediums, and 1 large in a span of 10 minutes. He turned to Guinevere and nodded. "I can see what you meant when you said you were in business." Guinevere chuckled. "Indeed. And while you're waiting to get a new job, you can go to various rug stores and start buying up their rugs for us to enchant them. We'll make our own rugs by taking them from bed and bath, and we'll start up an existing rug enchantment service for fancy Oriental rugs. I think we're going to make a lot of money here. You'll get 20% of the profits, I'll get 40%, and Jelena will get 40%. Jason whistled. "I think you're right, Guinevere. I think you're right. This job will probably keep me solvent until I get a real one." Chapter 322. The Muggle Apparition Network. Thursday, August 15, 1996, Richardson Household Prescott. United States of America. Rebecca Richardson smiled at the audience. "Why use a rug to travel from place to place when our service can get you there instantly?" Muggle floodlights shone in her eyes, as well as those of her 5 closest friends. All 6 of them had been forced to leave their jobs when WSC had clamped down on wizards taking Muggle positions. The obvious solution was to start their own business and offer a portion of the proceeds to Eric Street and his organization. This was going to be a cakewalk, she thought. Those kids from Cambridge had given her an idea, and she doubted that they knew what they were getting into. Granted, one of them was an engineer, one of them was a witch, and one of them was both. However, they'd never tried starting a business before. Hell, she doubted that any of them was over 25. Kerchatova and de Mornay had both won several awards for ingenuity and bravery. Being able to protect people from harm, however, did not necessarily translate to strong business skills. Richardson resumed her speech. "Our Muggle Apparition Network taxi service will take you wherever you want instantaneously for a small, reasonable fee. The procedure is simple. You call us, and we'll send one of our apparators over to your front door. Grab onto his or her or hand, and within a matter of seconds, you will be at your destination via side-along apparition. Imagine the convenience. You can get from Boston to Los Angeles in no time, and you don't need to shell out $400 for a competitor's product, which will spend most of its time sitting in your storage room. Why buy a rug or broom when you can effectively rent one through us? We will offer 4 pricing options for our program. Option 1 gives you a flat $19.95 per apparition on a pay-as-you-go program. Option 2 allows you to purchase 5 apparitions for $89.95. Option 3 will get you 10 apparitions for $175, and option 4 will get you 25 apparitions for $395. In addition to the above, we will offer a monthly subscription service. For $595, you can apparate as much as you want for 1 month, anywhere in the continental United States. Think of it as a monthly pass to let you travel wherever you want. 1-year subscriptions will also be offered for $6,995. You have all had to deal with the experience of waiting at the airport, waiting at the bus station, waiting at the train station, and waiting for your carpool. You have all been stuck in traffic jams and found yourselves jammed between two people on 7-hour plane flights. You have all heard about global warming and how burning fossil fuels has jeopardized the climate. Apparition is clean, fast, and eco-friendly. You don't have to wait any longer, and you and your business can travel more quickly than ever before. Richardson looked over the crowd. All right, everyone who wants to go on a free trip. Everyone cheered as an assistant brought over the bowl of raffle tickets. Richardson had told everyone interested in the product to submit their contact information in exchange for a raffle ticket. She pulled out a number, read it off, and glanced at the back of the room where a 40-something woman had begun jumping up and down excitedly. Richardson told her to come to the front of her room, confirmed that she had the winning number, and shook her hand. Congratulations, what's your name? Natalie Karen, Ms. Richardson. Where are you from, Natalie? Albany. I had thought that I had caught a break by being one of the first Muggles to go on a tour of the 2 remaining wizarding towns. But then I win this. Wow. Richardson looked at her. Is there anywhere you really want to go that you haven't? Karen nodded her head so fast she looked like a bobblehead doll. Yeah, Hawaii. Richardson shook her head and chuckled. We can't go outside the 48 contiguous states, anywhere else. Karen thought for a moment. Well, how about the Grand Canyon? Richardson smiled. That we can do. Do you have a camera? Karen nodded and brought out a digital camera. Yeah, Ms. Richardson, I brought it for the tour. Are you actually going to take me to the Grand Canyon? For 10 minutes, Natalie. Then we're going to have to come back so I can resume this press conference. Are you ready? Richardson breathed a sigh of relief as she held out her arm. She knew what the Grand Canyon looked like, so she could envision the south rim in her head. She couldn't tell this to the customer, however. Good, here, grab onto my arm and don't let go. On the count of 3, I'm going to transport us over there. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Richardson and Karen disappeared in a blaze of camera flashes. While they were gone, one of the other people associated with the Muggle Apparition Network stepped forward and asked if there were any questions. One man raised his hand, and the new speaker called on him. Will you always have people ready to apparate customers on a moment's notice? The new speaker paused a minute before he replied. It will depend upon demand. Right now, we've only got 6 people, but hope to expand that in a hurry if there's interested in man. We will do everything we can to make travel as easy as possible. However, think of this as a taxi service. If there are 6 cabs and 600 passengers, there may be a line, even though the trips themselves are very short. Will the wizard wait at the destination so that the customer can make the return journey? No, sir. The customer will be given a little button which he can press to summon the wizard for the return trip. What does it feel like to apparate? There's a bit of a squeezing sensation, but it's temporary. You'll get accustomed to it. Note that pregnant women should not use this service, as it may endanger the health of the baby. People were jotting down notes, feverishly, as first audience member sat down, and another woman raised her hand. How many people can you apparate at the same time? Up to 2, ma'am. We only have 2 hands. Can these 2 people travel to different places? Not unless the second person gets to his or her destination via the first person's destination. How safe is it? Are there any accidents? Can you rematerialize inside something like in those bad Star Trek episodes? It's perfectly safe, ma'am. The trip will take you right where you want to go, and if there is something already there, it will take you to the closest place which will be able to accommodate you and your passenger. Can Muggles learn to apparate on their own? What about people with only one of the Q and Z complexes? The speaker hesitated for a moment. We do not have enough information at this to answer that question. After all, Q and Z have only recently been discovered. The speaker held up his hand. Ladies and gentlemen, there will be time for more questions. However, they will be answered by Rebecca Richardson, who is about to return from the Grand Canyon with our winner. The speaker moved out of the way as Richardson and Karen reappeared on stage. Karen was rubbing her side a little, as if it ached her. However, her face was absolutely glowing. Richardson put a hand on Karen's shoulder. You all right? Yup, my side aches a little, but I guess I'll get accustomed to it. What did you think of the Grand Canyon? Karen's looked up to the sky. It was amazing. I didn't know it was that beautiful. It's huge. Want to show them what you picked up from there? She nodded, reached into her purse, and pulled out a Polaroid photograph. Cameras focused on it as she showed it to the audience. It was a picture of her and Richardson with the Grand Canyon in the background, and some stupid teenager waving at the camera about 20 feet behind them. The audience clapped wildly as Richardson thanked Karen for her help in the press conference and told her that she'd get a free 1-month apparition pass at no charge. Karen gave Richardson a hug and sat down. Richardson then took the stage once more to answer more questions. How do you think the airlines are going to handle this development? Richardson chuckled. Something tells me they won't like it. Granger residency outside London. Hermione Granger looked the email over. It seemed reasonable, and she prayed that it would work. She would also send patronesses to wizards who did not have email. The message would go to every person who had founded a Spill chapter since it had gone public. Each person was to delegate one member to join a committee to discuss the treatment of the centaurs and to help Nihim through these troubled times. Although Hermione herself longed to participate, she had to admit that this was beyond her, and she wasn't experienced or mature enough to do anything on this scale. Besides, she was in school. She couldn't be in 2 places at the same time anymore, which meant that she'd have to give up on Nihim to continue her lessons at Hogwarts. The committee was to focus on preserving the centaur culture, as well as convincing the rebelling Yahoos that the 2 species could live as equals, possibly by splitting the island of Howinghamland into 2 separate states, one for humans and one for centaurs. There was more than enough land to go around, after all. Once the committee was organized, it would be brought to London, and one of the members would be given the message she had received from Nihim. That would allow them access to the Centaur president's stronghold and permit them to start negotiations. She recalled hearing that one of the hallmarks of a good leader was not to try to do everything by him or herself. She hoped that this would apply in this case. Matarena Arequipa, Region Republic of Peru. Somewhere in an abandoned warehouse at the outskirts of the port city Matanari, shady men gathered. They were members of the People's Guerrilla Army, the armed division of the Communist Party of Peru, one of the several splinter groups contesting for the name, anyway. Much of the world knew and feared them by another name, Sendero Luminoso, the Shining Path. Their organization, branded as terrorists by the filthy capitalists and revisionists, worked relentlessly to defeat the reactionary forces of the corrupt government and the vile clergy, and to bring forth cultural revolution and a dictatorship of the proletariat, inevitably sparking a glorious world revolution and remaking the earth into a workers' paradise by true communism. How they ended up trafficking drugs and brutalizing peasants for the so serious sin of burying their dead or having a market, all within a decade of proclaiming such noble goals, was beyond Zaphareth's understanding. Honestly, he wanted to get whole thing over with. The leadership of the Watchers had deemed the group harmful for long years ago, and he, along with other agents of his city, covertly helped the Peruvian government to capture the Shining Path's founder and leader, the philosophist Abimael Guzman, known to his comrades as President Gonzalo, together with most of his lieutenants. But not all of them. The Shining Path was weakened, and most of his compatriots were allowed to fake their deaths and return to the sea, but it survived. He was one of the few to stay back, salvaging intel from a bunch of ignorant muggles. Ah, irony. It was made worse by loneliness. The only time he'd seen his people in the last decade was when he apparated to the designated safe houses at the designated times and gave his report. It could have been worse, of course. They could have just left him a pensive. At least every now and then he spoke with a fellow merwizard, if only for a few hours in a month. Still, he didn't like being in a wrong body at the wrong place in the wrong company. But perhaps today's catch will make it worthwhile. A message from Comrade Feliciano, known by a few as Oscar Ramos, the current leader of the Shining Path, ordering this group to get on a boat and go to Houyhnhnmland. They were to land on the western side of the continent, where the human slaves have already overthrown their beastmen, masters. Peru's workers were less than enthusiastic about the Great Revolution. Perhaps actual slaves might be more receptive to their ideas. And they had to hurry, too. People whispered that the rotten Chilean clergy was already involved there, in all their misguided self-righteousness. Zapharath, known to these muggles as Comrade Vasquez, thought about that part. To their knowledge, a few missionaries often led to great wars when they suffered martyrdom and prompted their brethren to avenge them. Clearly, they had to go. And without pinning the blame on the centaurs, if this conflict was to remain within the borders of Houyhnhnmland, as Trapananda seeked. So, he mused, in the end, this half-forgotten band of delusional criminals will actually be used to promote the greater good. I hope there will be a promotion in it for me somewhere. Sirhim Southern, Houyhnhnmland. The small fishing village wasn't one of the significant settlements of Houyhnhnmland. It's never been. Centaurs didn't like sailing, and consequently avoided giving their human subjects an opportunity to flee by ship. Sirahim's fishermen used small canoes for their work, staying close to the shores. That's why, while there was a dock on the shore, Captain Taliesin found it woefully inadequate. After all, his ship, the mighty Elfrida's Revenge, needed much more for a safe docking than a puny fishing canoe. And of course, the ship was much smaller on the outside. It housed hundreds of beings, many of them above human size. Fortunately, some wizards in the company had known the necessary spells to create a suitable dock. Talison's troll tamers were a mercenary company recruited from all around the magical world. Besides the squad of troll shock troopers, who's have guessed, clad in magic-resistant armor, they had wizards from over a dozen nations, fairies, house elves, some of them even free, goblins, a few giants and centaurs and velas. They even had a few hundred merpeople, ever since a nomadic tribe decided to earn its living by following their ship around, helping them doing their job, hurting people and breaking things for money. Outfitted with enchanted melee weapons, they were deadly for both sailors and their ships. The company made itself a name in the last Círdan Nestor War, assisting the Velas quite effectively against the slavers. Perhaps this was what prompted a local politico to hire them. From what they learned, Lord Garhim, the apparent leader of the dominant rebel faction here in the southern coast, was an egalitarian, member of a centaur faction that wanted to make yahoos and centaurs equal. He himself was a large manor's owner with ambitions of governorship, but he'd always gone out of his way to make his yahoo servant's life better. Of course, rumors said he also supported yahoo terrorist groups. With the breakdown of the central government, he could free them openly at last, and organized a militia from loyal individuals of both species to keep things in control. However, without access to enough Muggle arms or wizards, and without decent generals and discipline problems in the troops, similar militias of rebel factions and the remnants of the old government's forces posed them a problem. That's how the troll tamers came in the picture. Lord Garhim came at last to welcome them as the first of the troops got off the ship. He didn't make a good first impression on Taliesin. The Centaur Lord was visibly too young and inexperienced for his position, and somehow managed to mix foolish idealism and oily manners into one big, six-limbed pack. Nonetheless, his galleons were as good as anyone's. But he paid them to fight for him, not to believe him themselves. He didn't hesitate to let the noble being know this, to Garhim's spirited proclamation, "With you on our side, our just cause cannot fail, Captain." His own response was, "The only just I do is just pay us on time." "I'm not interested in your preaching, Garhim,"